Good morning and welcome. I'm Donna Zimmerman, your worship leader today for this service commemorating World AIDS Day, which is recognized annually on December 1st. We are the Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, or as we call ourselves, BBUUC. We gather in spiritual community because we need reminders of what matters most in life. Our weekly services, now virtual, still weave together our own thoughts and experiences with the beauty of readings, sermons, and music that comfort and challenge us to be aware of our capacity to make a difference in our own lives and in the world. To learn more about our church and our many activities to stay connected, including classes for adults and our youth, meetings, social gatherings, and much more, please visit our website, bbuuc.org, and to learn more about our denomination, go to uua.org.
A chalice lit in our midst is the symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundation of freedom, reason, and tolerance, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that visions a world flourishing with equality of all her people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us.
Our opening words today are a prayer created by the United Church of Canada. Open our eyes to the systems around us that oppress, hold down, and disadvantage the most vulnerable in our society. Open our ears to the myths, stereotypes, and lies that keep these systems going. Open our mouths to challenging conversations about race, sex, and differences. Open our hearts to the understanding that we are all affected by HIV/AIDS, so that we may increase and abound in our love for one another and for all people.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Wonder Box. I have something that's special to me in our box today. When I wrap myself in it, I am filled with wonderful, loving memories. What do you think it could be? Do you have a guess? It's a quilt. It's a small quilt. It's a memorial quilt. It's made of clothing from my father-in-law, John. John was and still is one of my most favorite people in this world. He passed away in 2001. When I hold this quilt and I think of him, I think of laughter. The kind of laughter that makes you snort and makes your ribs hurt from laughing so hard. I love him and he loved me, and every stitch of this quilt connects us in that love. I know of another memorial quilt. It's not so small, and if you took each of the panels that make up the parts of that quilt and laid them end to end, it would stretch for 50 miles, and it weighs 54 tons. That's 108,000 pounds. It is so special that it has its own name, the AIDS Memorial Quilt. The thing is, it started out during a pandemic just like we're in the middle of today. A virus known as HIV/AIDS began infecting people in the LGBTQ communities. At first, we didn't know what it was, and few people were giving attention to it because, well, it was only affecting marginalized folks. In 1987, to get people in the mainstream and our government to recognize the enormity of what was happening with this virus, a man named Cleve Jones came up with the idea of creating the AIDS quilt. He thought if people could visually see for themselves, just how many folks were dying from the disease, we would start paying attention and do something about it. And so he invited partners, friends, and family of people who had died from AIDS to make a panel that honored their loved one. Each panel of the quilt measures approximately 3 feet by 6 feet, a size that the quilt founders chose specifically because it's close to the size of a human grave. By quilting these panels together and displaying the quilt, people could see how many folks were being affected. The first sewn panel was created by Cleve for his loved one, Marvin Feldman. Through the years, the memorial quilt has been displayed during marches and protests for LGBTQ rights. The quilt itself has become a powerful educator, a storyteller, and a symbol for social justice. Today, there are 48,000 panels in the project, each lovingly stitched by friends and family grieving those who have died from AIDS. This only represents about 20% of the people who have died from this terrible virus. When I think about the AIDS memorial quilt, I think of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Just like the threads that bind and sew these quilts together, we are all connected. We are all family. We are, as the seventh principle says, part of the interconnected web of all existence. I wonder, where do you see yourself in this lesson? And how can you help to take care of our interconnected family? And with this, our lesson is told. Until the next time.
We may be separated in person, but we are still connected in our hearts and our spirits. As a church community, we support each other in troubles and we celebrate in happiness. That's what friends do. And physical distance is immaterial when you are connected at the heart. We light a candle of sorrow for the rising COVID cases and the number of escalating deaths. A candle of hope for the vaccines under preparation. A candle of gratitude for our healthcare workers, teachers, and other essential workers. A candle of recognition that this holiday season is not what any of us would have wanted. And a candle of thanks for all who continue to sacrifice and remain diligent with their social distancing and safety precautions so we can get through to the other side. One last candle for the joys and concerns that remain unspoken in the sanctuary of our hearts.
Who is my neighbor? Every soul who lives upon the earth. I have been called to treat each one with dignity and worth, working for justice, seeking peace, and cultivating care, offering hope to those whose lives are laden with despair. When I can ease another's pain, I know I'll do my part. When I can bring another joy, I'll open up my heart. When I have more than someone else, I'll share the things I can. When I am tempted to be cruel, I'll strive to understand. Who is my neighbor? Earth itself and all the beings there. Flora and fauna, fish fish and fowl, the trees that graze the air. River and prairie, sea and sky, I honor and respect. These are my neighbors, these I vow to cherish and protect. Oh, may we build a world where all have everything they need. May we be free from hate and fear, from violence and from greed. May our lives be tributes to compassion, love, and trust, till we are kin to all the world, and all are kin to us.
Another way we live our values is by our giving. This is not something we have to do, but something we choose to do. This is not a bill we must pay or the price of an admission ticket. We give from our hearts because we know the work of our church embodies our principles. Thank you for your ongoing support of your pledge commitment, which supports the church budget and ministries. The plate collection for the month of November will benefit BBUUC's Rainbow Welcoming Ministry, which encourages recognition, support, and respect for LGBTQ+ identity. Thank you so much for your generosity. We are pleased to welcome back to our pulpit our member, Manny Andrade. He is a life-professed Franciscan friar and holds a degree in sacred theology. Manny received diaconal orders in 2000 and was ordained a priest in 2003 in the American Catholic Church. Manny has been a social worker serving communities living with HIV/AIDS since 1989. Manny, the pulpit is yours.
Good morning. For almost 40 years, every year on December 1st, the world commemorates World AIDS Day. People around the world unite to show support for people living with HIV or in some way are affected by HIV. We also remember the roughly 40 million deaths since 1981 and join in solidarity with the 38 million people currently living somewhere along the spectrum of HIV illness. In spite of advancements in the disease, in treatment, HIV disease remains significant and impactful. As a result, every year we take time to acknowledge those who live with HIV/AIDS. We remember those who have lost their lives to HIV and AIDS. We also acknowledge the countless friends and family who are in some way impacted by this illness via their loved ones. In 2020, for good reason, we've been focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had to adapt, redirect, and in some cases reinvent how we live and work. Once again, we find that we've been blindsided by a virus. It's very much like the beginning of the HIV pandemic, where we've had to face a lot of uncertainty, a lot of helplessness, and a lot of vulnerability. Again, we face increasing numbers of new infections. Further, due to the economic downturn, many face real threats to their livelihood. We have also faced erratic reactions, such as the need for some to keep large amounts of toilet tissue at their disposal. And I suspect the hoarding is more likely about some misplaced need to have some control in a time of great uncertainty. This hoarding behavior was also seen in various countries. Now we live with two pandemics that affect our lives, our emotional and spiritual well-being. HIV and the concurrent antagonist COVID-19 is somehow showing once again how health is intertwined with other critical issues. This new pandemic has placed a mirror in front of us to reflect once again the disparities in accessing healthcare and other services. We see inequality in accessing care by a large number of African Americans, Latinx, Native Americans, and elders living in nursing homes. And these are the groups that are disproportionately impacted by this new virus. We also see a tremendous strain on unprepared healthcare and an unprepared healthcare system severely impacted by political polarization, which directly affects healthcare for everyone. ICU units are full in many parts of the world, and they lack essential resources, and doctors are forced to decide who will be treated and who will not. This chaos underscores our need to reduce inequality in the provision of health care, to uplift human rights, to promote gender equality and social protection, while at the same time sustaining economic stability. So with all these things in mind, this year the theme of World AIDS Day is global solidarity and shared responsibility. Like HIV, COVID-19 has once again demonstrated that during a pandemic, no one is safe until everyone is safe. With HIV, we learned safer sex techniques that minimize the risk of transmission of the virus. We continue, however, to fight stereotypes about who becomes infected with HIV. We know that anybody participating in risky behavior is susceptible to infection, period. It's not who you are, it's what you do that puts you at risk. With HIV, some communities fought condom usage education because they espoused a proven false premise that teaching about condoms usage promotes promiscuity. Even when presented with a multiplicity of studies showing that over 98% reduction of HIV transmission with proper condom usage, there was resistance. We presented with factual information. These persons held beliefs that blindly triggered passionate intransigence. These persons flatly denied rigidly processed empirical information. At the time, we also had a president who refused to mention HIV or AIDS. As the numbers mounted towards the first 10,000 deaths, there was still no word from the president. But with the outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, with 7 deaths and 172 infected, the president immediately called for assistance and treatment. The disparities were crystal clear. You only had to look at the stats to see where priorities were placed. Several decades later, a new life-threatening virus is at our door that is also making its rounds all over the planet. This new virus, unlike HIV, is airborne. COVID-19 is propagated the same way that TB and other airborne illnesses are spread. In the U.S., we have 11 million COVID infections, and we've reached 250,000 deaths. Once again, we have a president who, for reasons that make absolutely no sense from the public health perspective, downplays the seriousness of the pandemic. He ignores public health precautions and guidelines set by the CDC and the World Health Organization. He holds rallies and meetings ignoring social distancing. Thus, we now hear the term super spreader far too often. We see that in those places where guidelines are not followed, the numbers of new infections grow exponentially. In places where guidelines are followed, the virus spread has slowed to a crawl. I look at our friends in South Korea, New Zealand, and Taiwan with a sense of awe due their successful efforts at stemming COVID by fully engaging in safety precautions. I often wish that curtailing the tide of COVID was as simple as engaging people in a way that engages concern for those who are most vulnerable. How do we make people care? COVID is a life-threatening illness that HIV has become highly politicized. Life-sustaining public health directives have been set aside. The CDC guidelines, our greatest hope of stopping the spread of COVID, is muddled by partisan politics. Reverend Forrest Gilmore, a UU minister and executive director of the Shalom community in Indianapolis, gives an insight through our 7th UU principle that brings hope in this time of pandemic. The 7th principle is based on respect for the interdependent web of all existence. I love that. He states that we make a profound mistake when we limit the 7th principle to merely environmental issues or ideas. It is much more. The 7th principle is our response to the great dangers of both individualism and oppression. It is our solution to the seeming conflict between the individuals and the group. When we see the world through the lens of interdependence, the 7th principle is our Unitarian Universalist way of coming to fully embrace something greater than ourselves. The interdependent web of life can be expressed as the spirit of life. Sound familiar? The grounding of all being, the oneness of all existence, the community-forming power, the process of life, the creative force. And it can also offer an understanding of God if you're in that space. When we begin to understand how dependent and responsible we really are for each other, we can develop a profound social understanding of ourselves in relation to everything around us. Given this understanding, we begin to see that this is what we and our individualist culture desperately needs. Now, given this beautiful exegesis of the 7th principle by Reverend Gilmore, we look at our response to HIV and to COVID in light of our interdependence. We face these two pandemics together as a planet. We can't run away from either one. We are interdependent beings. And the 7th principle, in view of COVID and HIV, calls us to care for ourselves, to care for our physical and emotional well-being, and by doing so, we are respecting the right of everyone else to live a full and healthy life. In this time of living with both HIV and COVID, we can come to a better understanding of our obligation to each other in order to be able to care for one another. Our interdependence is all tied together with the need to use social distancing, to wear a mask, to wash your hands, to get tested for COVID and HIV, to use condoms properly, to clean needles, to take PrEP or pre-exposure prophylaxis to prevent HIV transmission. If infected with HIV, it asks us to stay the course of our medications because we know U equals U, meaning if someone living with HIV reaches viral suppression, then HIV is no longer transmittable. Undetectable equals untransmittable. If you are pregnant and live with HIV, it asks you to maintain viral suppression to give you an over 90% chance that you will not transmit HIV to your baby. For a few years now, Cuba has reported 0 HIV-positive babies born to positive mothers. They have eliminated HIV transmission in pregnant women, and we can too. The first principle talks about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Often, it is a lot easier to believe than to practice. It's an abstraction. However, it's hard to deny. We have learned that leaving people behind is not an option if we're to succeed. Eliminating stigma and discrimination, putting people at the center, and grounding our responses in human rights and gender-responsive approaches, and having a public health focus are the key to ending the colliding pandemics of HIV and COVID-19. So, December 1st, we remember and honor our lost ones, On December 1st, we remember every person infected with HIV. And now I would like to add also COVID. And remember that everyone is a child of light. We honor and respect every person affected who is caring for infected loved ones and who are also dealing with fears and anxiety. We also hold with love every person grappling to decipher confusing and distorted messages relating to their health. They deserve our patience and our kindness. We are all traveling together on the same vessel. We live on a big blue marble called planet Earth. We're all part of the same network. We're all in this together. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Blessed be.
Honor the dark as you do the light. Receive the gifts that come to us by day and by night. I choose to honor the dark, uncertainty and change. Deliver us from fear until only love remains. Honor the dark as you do the light. Receive the gifts that come to us by day and by night. I choose to honor the dark, uncertainty and change. Deliver us from fear until only love remains. Honor the dark as you do the light. Receive the gifts that come to us by day and by night. I choose to honor the dark, uncertainty and change. Deliver us from fear until only love remains. Honor the dark as you do the light. Receive the gifts that come to us by day and by night. I choose to honor the dark, uncertainty and change. Deliver us from fear until only love remains. Honor the dark.
When we lit this chalice at the beginning of the service, we were reminded that the spark is a light within all of us. When we extinguish the chalice, it does not go dark. We still carry the light within us. We honor the light and the dark because no matter where we go, we carry our values with us, and that is what changes our world. Our worship has ended. Now, let our service begin. May it be so. May you be so.